I like wasn't processing. I was like, okay. And then I was like, it's one of those days. Could be. That's okay, we're not starting to look until next week. So. Yeah, no, me too. Which is good.
12 hours I came in with so many credits.
I'm not sure. What if we're not Amazon? But you can always call them and ask them. I'm sure.
I wonder if they have it in the like library.
Like in the Blacksburg I'm one of those.
Yeah, right hand is great.
I like to write out kids. I wish I did everything he says. And I can't do that when I'm writing. Like, it's too much. I was just thinking that. I was like, are you on this? Don't throw some comments. I tried to do notes like by hand one time, and I couldn't write down as fast as I wanted to. So this is easier.
I can't either, but when I type, I just like oh, I need to format the font. And if I have like a typo, I want to go back and fix it, but it's too much.
Found it.
And all of a sudden I was like,
Last week, do you remember each other? No.
I recognize you.
Yeah, you recognize me. This is Evan. This is Heather.
Okay. I sat by you once about studying. Did you ever come to most?
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, towards the end of the semester.
Heather, okay.
Yeah, we kind of caught her like halfway through. So now I'm like, okay. Now starting the new semester. Yeah.
I apologize if Lisa ever calls on you and I start reading or respond because Heather sounds just like my name to me when like I don't know why, but whenever he says Heather, I like respond and everyone's like,
Heather.
See? It's similar. I don't know, but I've always done it. Like ever since I was little, like I'll start reading and everyone will look at me and be like, what's your opinion?
I really hate my name because it's so common. Like I had my best friend's name is Heather. And back home, and we had three Heathers in our parents. So we beat her and then my sister. Her favorite basketball player.
Oh, interesting.
That's so cute. Your parents
Heather.
Your parents less broke your heart?
Yes.
Your parents were like, you get to name your siblings.
They wanted to do it.
There's a lot of Alexes too. That's it, there's a lot of Alex.
Yeah.
My sister would pinky or something.
I actually think I
It is indeed. Lots of boys. Oh. That's all I'm worried about. That's why I could find it.
That makes sense. I felt, but I like saw the steps were nice. Because I was like trying to be careful, but I wasn't really. I like made down the steps okay, but then once I stepped on the bed, and like literally as my head goes on the steps, I like slid forward, so I kept covering it with my elbows so bad. Every time the light goes down, I go. So they were like, I was rolling everywhere, and I like couldn't press down and just hit there.
So I did it when I came out of the bathroom, and I like opened the bathroom door, and somehow I went into my hat, and it hit me like right on my nose, and it bruised instantly. I was like, oh, pretty dead. It's going away now. But yeah, that happened.
Okay, welcome back, everybody.
It's like,
We're officially starting the class today. First lecture in this unit here on a city that doesn't get a lot of press compared to Florence, compared to Venice, and compared to Rome. The city of Siena. It's in Tuscany. It's not far from Florence, and we're going to talk about the Republican fresco cycles in the city hall, in the Palazzo Pubblico, painted by Ambrogio Lorenzetti in the 1330s. Then we come back on Wednesday. We'll have a discussion day on the Randolph Starn article about the Lorenzetti frescoes in the Palazzo Pubblico. First of 14 discussion days. Then next Monday we have a lecture on the centripetal force. The centrifugal forces threatening to tear these communes apart, factionalism and family feuds. We'll look especially at the Shakespeare story of Romeo and Juliet, which is actually not created by Shakespeare, but was written much earlier in Italy about the Montecchi and Capulati families, inspired the name Montague and Capulet. Their story is not uncommon in Renaissance Italy. It is part and parcel of the social framework. We've got an article by Sarah Blanchie about the prosecution of crime and the attempt to maintain order through a criminal justice system in two cities, in Bologna and Perugia, in the 1200s, the time that Romeo and Juliet is supposed to have taken place. That discussion will be on Wednesday, a week from Wednesday. And then we go to Florence for 3 class periods. First we have a lecture a week from today. No, 2 weeks from today, sorry. On the growth of the city. Florence in the year 1200 is an important city, but it's one of many important cities. By the year 1300, it's one of the great metropolitan centers of Renaissance Italy. We'll see how that transformation happens, the commercial forces that create so much wealth and capital in the city during the course of the 13th and 14th centuries. Then we have a discussion day using 2 articles, one by John Najami and the other by, I don't remember. It's on the syllabus. That talk about the unusual nature of the Republic in Florence and how it's intimately tied to the commercial structure of the city, specifically the guild structure of the city. Then we have a primary source discussion day. We've got the Ricordanza, which is like a diary of sorts, of a Florentine merchant named Gregorio Dassi, who lived towards the end of the 1300s, into the early 1400s. And he records in this diary all of his business triumphs and mostly failures, but also the kind of course of his family. He blows through like 6 or 7 wives, all of them dying in childbirth, and he lists all the children that he has from these wives. So we get a real picture of a kind of middling Florentine merchant living here at the turn of the 15th century. So that's a primary source discussion. So we have 3 days on Florence, and then we have just a lecture day, no discussion, for the city of Venice. And then we'll have a review day, and then we'll have the in-class exam. So we've got 5 lecture topics here, and 4 discussion days. Wednesday, Monday, and then Wednesday. And then we'll have a review day, and then we'll get into the exam in class. One question will be on the secondary source scholarship, the readings, the discussion day stuff. One question will be more on the primary source narrative structure of the lecture days. Right, so let's get into this. Cities were a massive feature of the Roman Empire. Rome created a whole network of urban spaces in antiquity. But most of those cities died with the collapse of public authority in the West in the 400s and 500s. But they really don't in Italy. Italy remained a very urbanized part of the Mediterranean world. And because these cities never really died and were continuously inhabited, they have a very very firm sense of themselves, of an urban identity, of a corporate, civic, urban identity. And they call themselves comune, communes, is the way it's often translated, but that has overtones of the 60s and hippies and all that. It's really more commonwealth. Just like the state of Virginia is not actually a state, it's a commonwealth. And the idea behind this term is that there are many forces at work trying to destroy the harmony of a city, and it's important for people to work together for the commonwealth, for the commonweal, for the common good, in order to prevent disintegration. And these independent city-states develop over the course of the 10th and 11th into the 12th century in really political isolation from the rest of Europe, especially the realm north of the Alps. But in 1158, in the middle of the 12th century, the German emperor, a man named Frederick Barbarossa, appears and attempts to reestablish imperial control over Italy. Once upon a time, going all the way back to Charlemagne at the late 8th century, the German emperors had maintained at least nominal control over Italy. But that had ceased to be the case as the 10th and 11th centuries moved on. Their sphere of power became smaller and smaller and much more Germanic. Well, Frederick Barbarossa has big plans. And in the 4th year of his reign, in 1158, he travels south of the Alps. First time a German emperor had come south of the Alps in centuries, to a place called Roncaglia, right there. And he holds a parliament of sorts, which in imperial terms is called a diet. The Diet of Roncaglia. It's where he summons all the great and good of the land to meet him and discuss the state of affairs. And he maintains at Roncaglia that he, as the emperor, has great powers over these Italian commonwealths. He maintains that he has the power of taxation on roads and rivers. In other words, the keeping and maintaining of toll roads and toll waterways. He maintains that he and only he has the power to mint coins. Many of these cities had been minting their own coins for quite some time as a necessary part of their commercial world. He maintains that no, he and he alone has the authority to mint coins. He maintains that he has control over abandoned land and land that has been confiscated because of criminal activity, taking this power away from the city governments in Italy. He wants to raise a special taxation, a special revenue stream for his current royal visit and other future royal visits. He maintains that he has the power to appoint judges and that he can maintain royal palaces in these cities. This comes as quite a shock to these commune dwellers, who had really been living on their own for centuries at this point. all of these things that he is claiming to have power over is something that the communes had been running on their own for quite some time now. They had been running their own legal systems. They had been minting their own coins and collecting taxes and tolls on the roads and rivers around their cities. And so the Italian communes do not take kindly to this foreigner coming down from north of the Alps. And so they form a military alliance called the Lombard League. So called because this area is Lombardia, the area around Milan. They form a military alliance in order to stand up to this imperial reappearance. And a war begins between the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa and a dozen or so cities of the Lombard League. And in 1176, after a long struggle, decade-long struggle, the Italian cities of the Lombard League once and for all defeat the Emperor Frederick Barbarossa at a place called Legnano, which is near present-day Milan. Frederick Barbarossa retreats across the Alps. His son remains south of the Alps as a prisoner of the Lombard League, his son Enzo. And eventually a peace treaty is signed between the Lombard League and Frederick Barbarossa. It's negotiated up at Constance, which is in modern-day Switzerland, on the northern side of the Alps. And here are some of the terms of this agreement. We, Frederick Barbarossa, Emperor of the Romans, hereby grant to you the cities, territories, and persons of the League, the Lombard League, the rights within and without the cities, as you have been accustomed to hold them. In other words, before I arrived for the Diet of Roncalli. All injuries, losses, and damages which we or our followers have sustained from the League or any of its members are hereby pardoned, and all such transgressors are hereby received back into our favor. Let bygones be bygones. We will remain no longer than is necessary in any city or bishopric, the seat of a bishop. It shall be permitted to the cities of the Lombard League to erect fortifications. The Lombard League may maintain its organization. This is a complete repudiation of the powers that Emperor Frederick Barbarossa had claimed at the Diet of Roncalli in 1158. It's a triumph for these cities who had developed independent of imperial power and who win back their traditional rights which they had accumulated over the course of the 10th, 11th, and early 12th centuries. The power of the empire, of the German emperors, will really never again play a major role in Italian affairs. Not until a very different kind of emperor comes to the throne in the 1500s in the form of Charles V, who is really more king of Spain than he is German emperor. And so there's several hundred years here in which these cities can establish local customs, local mores, and local institutions. And though it's not a member of the Lombard League, owing to its protected position south of the Apennine Mountains, the city of Siena is one of the many beneficiaries of the war between the Lombard League and Frederick Barbarossa. So let's take a look here at this often ignored city of Tuscany. It is in the western side of the peninsula. These are the Apennine Mountains, which form a kind of spine down the Italian peninsula. It's in quite hilly portion of Tuscany. Tuscany is quite hilly, but Siena's in a particularly hilly portion. And this is a satellite image with 100 miles on each side, so 1,000 square miles, or 10,000 square miles, I should say. It's south of Florence, To the east is Perugia, Pisa, and Lucca are to the northwest. It's not a very big city. None of these Italian communes are much bigger than Blacksburg in both size and also in population. If we zoom in even further, you can see that it's a kind of, it snakes out over the crests of several hills. And the geography, in a very real sense, forms the shape, the very irregular shape from a satellite view of the city. It's focused on two main piazzas. There is the cathedral right here, and then there is the campo, the field. The piazza or square in front of the building we'll be talking about today, the Palazzo Pubblico. The cathedral is interesting in its own right. A little side story here. In the early 1300s, the city of Siena was very prosperous. And they wanted their cathedral to be the largest church in the world. And so they began an expansion project. The original cathedral's nave is here, and the transept right here. All basilica form a cross, the transept being the horizontal portion of a crucifix. And what they wanted to do was to transform the transept into a huge nave and make the nave into the transept. So in other words, to reverse the orientation, tripling the size of the cathedral. The problem is that in 1348, half the people in the city died because of the Black Death, and the project was abandoned. And so if you go there today, you can see the half-completed new nave off to one side of the transept. But we're not worried about the cathedral. We are worried about the other square, the civic, the political part of the city. And that's where we find this building right here. The creatively titled Palazzo Pubblico, which means public palace, or in other words, city hall. Built at the turn of the 14th century, this is where the assembly meets. In Sienese terminology, the Gran Concilio, or Great Council. About 300 people are in this representative assembly. It's also where the mayor of sorts has his office. Italian cities have an unusual executive arrangement. The chief executive officer is known as the podestà, which comes from the word for power, podere. It's always a foreigner meaning someone from another city. They never trusted a local person to be the podestà because they thought they would be too enmeshed in the factions and alliances of the city. They wanted an outsider to come in to be the ultimate judge. It's more of a chief magistrate than it is an executive position, because the real executive power in this city is in the form of the Council of Nine, or Il Nove, which is simply the Nine in Italian. And all of these political officers meet here in the Palazzo Pubblico, the Gran Concilio, the Podestà. It's where the prison is as well, and it's where the Council of the Nine meet. And these executive officers, it's really a mayor in 9 parts, or a president in 9 parts. From the Constitution of 1309, gives us a kind of hint as to who these people were. The Constitution of 1309 says the members of the Council of the Nine, Il Nove, should be chosen from mercanti della città, merchants of the city, ovvero della mezza gente, or the middling people. And that's all they tell us. A later antiquarian in the 1600s said that the people who served in the Council of Nine were upper-level merchants. They were professionals, that is to say lawyers or doctors. They were people of substance. They were not a nobility, because there really is no nobility per se in these cities. We'll talk a lot more about that as we get to Florence. They are the upper level of society, though. But you have in this Republican government some really recognizably modern institutions. The Grand Concilio is not unlike our House of Representatives. Its membership turns over quite frequently, and so that if you're a person of even moderate substance in this city, at some point or another in your life, you will probably serve the Grand Concilio. You will have a seat at the table. And you may even reach that executive position of the nine. The people who serve in this executive council serve very short terms. 2 months in office. And that's it. And they bring a whole new group in. 2 months in office. And another group, 2 months in office. So 6 times a year. And the reason for this is their fear of tyranny. They are acutely aware of the potential for a person to become individually too powerful and set themselves up as the lord of the city, as a dictator, as a despot. This happens in many of these communes over the course of the 1200s and the 1300s. It happens in Padua. It happens in Lucca. It happens in Pisa. It happens in Milan. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And so there's a great fear of one person becoming too powerful and usurping the whole Republican system. So short terms, a lot of rollover, so one person can't establish a power base. And they have a meeting room inside the Palazzo Pubblico. It's probably about the size of this room, actually. 24 by 42 feet. It's a rectangle. And there are frescoes on 3 walls and a window on the 4th. So this wall that you can't see is a window, fresco, fresco, fresco. You've got 42-foot-long walls that face each other, and then a 24-foot wall which faces the window. And it's on these walls that Ambrogio Lorenzetti painted what we call the allegory of good and bad government. He didn't actually give it a title. It's what historians and art historians have called it. So facing the windows, you have this allegory of good government, and flanking it on either side are the benefits or the fruits of good government and the consequences of bad government. And this is where these 9 councilors would meet for their 2-month term until they're replaced by another set of councilors. So let's look first at the allegory of good government. About 24 feet wide, about 10 or 15 feet high. So they're very large frescoes. The figures are very large, and even today, almost 700 years later, the colors are still fairly vibrant. So you can almost imagine how bright they would have been all those centuries ago. So there's a lot of figures. There's a lot going on in this fresco. We're going to take it step by step. We're first going to start with the left side of the fresco. This is an embodiment of justitia, justice in Latin. We know that because there are the scales of justice, just like justice is holding a set of scales outside of our own Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. And around justitia are 3 angels. And they have labels above them, so that the audience, the members of the council, are certain as to their meaning. Above Justitia is an angel labeled Sapientia, wisdom. And to her right and left are angels of retribution and compensation. The retributive justice here is an archangel with a sword ready to cut this guy's head off. There's the sword, there's the guy, his hands are bound behind his back. And then the angel of compensation is handing what looks like a chest or a sack to these 2 very grateful 14th century Sienese here. And then there's a third figure down this line in white right here. That's the figure of Concordia. It says Latin for harmony, concord. It's a modern word drawn from that. And we know it's harmony because she has a box that says Concordia. And it's hard to see now, but there are ropes that go down from the scales of justice. I've highlighted them here in green, and into this box that's being held by this embodiment, this female anthropomorphic embodiment of Concordia. And it's probably a reference that was originally made by one of the great pre-humanists, a man named Brunetto Latini, in 1263. He's writing in Padua, which he wrote that all in common should pull together on a rope of peace and welfare, because there is no surviving for a land divided by faction. So, justice, guided by wisdom, connected, and is the resulting in harmony, in concordia. This box then has this rope spool out into the hands of all of these people here. And again, it's hard to see now, but if you saw it in person, and especially if you saw it 700 years ago, it would be very clear the connections between the scales of justice, harmony, and everybody in Sarah Brunetto Latini's formulation pulling on a rope together. We're all working together. And these people would be very recognizably 14th century Sienese political officers. They are dressed all very well, and they are meant to be the kind of embodiment of the members of the Grand Council, but also, more importantly, members of the Council of Nine. And they're all holding on this rope of harmony that goes back up through to justice. So that's the left side of this 24-foot wide wall. Then you've got a lot of people on this side, sitting on a massive couch. So let's now look at the right side of this frame. In the center you have what at first glance looks like it could be a king or an emperor, but this is a republic, and that would be very antithetical to the republican virtues. A few years ago, I never remember exactly who found it, found this in a 14th century book. It's an illuminated manuscript painted by Ambrogio Lorenzetti, the same artist who painted these frescoes. And it is marked, this figure is marked as the embodiment of the city of Siena. And it's a very similar iconography here, holding a scepter and a shield, and beneath which are wolves and two infants and wolves. What do you think the significance of infants and wolves is? Yes, sir. Romulus and Remus. Siena liked to claim a great connection to the city of Rome. Now, in all probability, there was no Siena during the time of Rome. The layout of the city is just simply not Roman. It's very medieval. But that was part of their mythology, that they had this intense connection back to Rome, back to the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, the two abandoned twins that are nursed by wolves. And so this image right here is the embodiment of the city of Siena. Not a regal figure, but rather an allegorical figure for the city itself. And this embodiment of Siena is flanked by several figures, all of which are women. All of which are a certain virtue from the virtues and vices. And just as Justitia was flanked by three angels, wisdom, retribution, compensation, so too is the embodiment of Siena flanked by three angels: charity, faith, and hope. In addition, there are 6 large female figures to the right and to the left, the embodiment of Siena here. they all have a Latin title above them, so that the audience is very clear about who they are supposed to be and what they are supposed to be. Directly to Siena's right and left are prudence and mercy. Flanking them, fortitude and temperance. Temperance holding an hourglass, because the word temperance is derived from the Latin word tempus, which means time. Fortitude is holding a shield. And then finally, a second Justitia and Pax, peace, to the far left. This Justitia is much more violent than the other Justitia because she has a sword, a crown, and a disembodied head. She has beheaded a monarch, a king, who would seek to be a tyrant over this republic. Beneath Justitia are prisoners being rounded up by Sienese soldiers. And unfortunately, we've lost a big section of the fresco. Little sidebar. Frescoes are called frescoes because it means fresh in Italian. And how you paint a fresco is you put up plaster on a wall, and before it dries, you paint it. And then the paint seeps into the wall and is preserved in that manner, which is why you can clean a fresco with soap and water, because the paint's not on the wall, it's in the wall. The problem is sometimes the plaster falls off the wall, like it's happened here, and so we've lost a huge segment of this fresco here, and you can also see right here as well. We've lost a large segment. So, in this main frame, this allegory of good government, you have figures, you have Latin titles to make it clear who these figures are, like Sapientia. You can see S-A-P-I-E-N-T-I-A, wisdom. But you also have Italian annotations at the bottom of the wall. Little text boxes, so that there's no question as to what Ambrogio Lorenzetti wants the audience to understand. Now, Italian at this point is still only rarely written. Dante writes the Divine Comedy, the Inferno, the Purgatory, and Paradise in Italian. And that's somewhat rare to do. Everybody speaks Italian, but most of the educated elite write in Latin. Ambrogio Lorenzetti is written both in Latin and also in Italian. And this is so that the audience, these counselors of the nine, are crystal clear as to what they are supposed to do in their job. Now, not everybody could read Italian, certainly. A lot of people are illiterate. But there would always be at least one, statistically speaking, literate person in the Council of Nine who could then read out these Italian passages to his fellow counselors to make it clear. So this one, this annotation is beneath that line of Sienese counselors holding the rope of Concordia, and it says in Italian, wherever this holy virtue, Concordia, rules, she induces to unity many souls. And these souls, gather together for such a purpose, a common good for their master undertake. There's a huge emphasis on working together in this allegory. And we all are in the same boat. We've got to work together. We all must pull on the same rope, and that will provide us with harmonious, just society. So that's the wall that's opposite the window. Then you've got two walls that are parallel to each other. On my left, there is the fruits of good government, and then on my right, there is the consequences of bad government. Let's look first at the fruits of good government. It's 42 feet long, 15 or so feet tall. It's an enormous fresco. Must have taken him years. And it's in two halves. There's a cityscape, and then there's a countryside. We're going to start in the countryside. There's a lot going on here. You've got some merchants riding out of the city. You've got an angel holding basically a cartoon caption that in Italian says, "Without fear, let each man freely walk in working, let everyone sow." And there are people out here in the fields, and more people in the fields, and more people in, not the fields, but in vineyards or olive yards. But then there's something right here in the middle, placed right in the middle of this whole countryscape, which at first blush seems a bit out of place. There's two figures with their heads down on their chests. They're being hanged. Criminals. We might think that's not a good fruit of good government for our modern sensibilities, but for a medieval audience, the execution of justice often involved executions. And so the fact that he's prominently featuring two people being hanged, for this 14th century Sienese audience, they would interpret that as justice being carried out. They have there's no anti-death penalty movement in 14th century Italy. So that's one half of the fruits of good government. About 20 feet long or so, by 15 feet, is the countryside. Then the other side is the cityscape. And it's very recognizably Siena. And we know it's supposed to be Siena because all the way over here in the corner is a black and white striped bell tower, and that's the bell tower for the cathedral, which is also black and white striped marble. So this is, without question, supposed to be Siena, and undoubtedly other of these buildings, if you could go to 14th century Siena, you would see a reasonable facsimile of them. The city has changed so much in those 700 years that we really can only positively identify the bell tower, but I think these are probably modeled on what Lorenzetti saw in Siena itself. There's a lot of stuff going on in this city. There is some damage right there that's fallen off the wall. Let's kind of go through this. You have a teacher and students here. Teacher giving a lecture, which lecture comes from the Latin word to read. And what a lecture was in a medieval university was the professor taking the book, which most people didn't have, and reading it to the students, thus lecturing. And the students taking notes because they couldn't afford to buy the book. Fun, fun, fun. So that's what's happening right here, a lecture. You've got some commerce happening over here in a shop, selling something. Unfortunately, the plaster's fallen, so you can't really see. You've got some pack animals full of goods coming in from the countryside. You've got workers on scaffolding, literally building the city, a sign of progress. You have women dancing in the street, not being assaulted, but celebrating in a safe environment. So all of these things taken together, the city and the countryside, show the effects. What will happen if you, the counselors of the nine, work together? Don't think about yourself. Think about the common good. Think about others. Be altruistic. There's also another caption underneath this frame in Italian, again, that says, "Look how many goods derive from justice, and how sweet and peaceful is that life of the city where she, justice, outshines any other." So this is one wall flanking the allegory of good government. Then opposite this is, unfortunately, a very damaged fresco, but one which combines the dual aspects, the allegory of bad government and the consequences of bad government. Again, with a cityscape and the contado, the countryside around the city. So we're going to start with the mirror image of the allegory of good government, the allegory of bad government. It's arranged in exactly the same way, with a central figure flanked by 3 other figures on each side and surmounted by 3, in this case not angels but demons. So the central figure is tyranny, with horns, with fangs, wearing black, and his eyes are crossed, which I've always wondered about, but anyway, maybe because he's perverse in some way. Eyes crossed. Beneath him is not an image of Romulus and Remus suckling from the wolves, but rather a cloven hoofed goat, a synonym or a animalistic representation of the devil. Then beneath tyranny is a female figure whose hands are bound. Unfortunately, there's damage to the fresco, but it's Justitia. Above tyranny are 3 inversions of angelic personages: pride, greed, and vanity. Superbia, avaritia, vangloria. Vanity is looking at herself in a mirror. Pride is holding a sword and an oxen's yoke. And they are the inverse of wisdom, hope, and charity. Faith, sorry. Hope, faith, and wisdom that were above the embodiment of Siena. Then you've got, to the right, or my right, his left side of tyranny, 3 figures: furor, anger; guerra, war, and guerra's title is written around the shield, G-U-E-R-R-A; and divisio, or faction. Really like this character. He's wearing a half white and half black cloak, and is attempting to saw its own leg off. The dangers of faction, destroying the body politic for selfish reasons. One side destroying the other side. And then to tyranny's right, cruelty, betrayal, and fraud. Betrayal is holding an interesting animal. The front half is a lamb. Very sweet. The back half is a scorpion. Betrayal. Cruelty, oh, my favorites in this fresco, is holding a baby by the back of the neck, holding it up like that. The baby right here, arm, leg, and is tormenting it with a serpent, which I suppose you could say is very cruel. Do not torment your babies with snakes. And then again, here at the base, the image of Justice with her hands bound. The message is made quite clear underneath the fresco in another one of the annotation boxes. And Lorenzetti writes, "Where justice is bound, no one for the common good ever joins together, nor goes straight ahead for the right, but is agreeable that tyranny should rise." So this is one half of the wall. The other half of the wall is divided into 2 sections. The city that is poorly ruled and the countryside that is poorly ruled. A lot of the fresco's gone. As we can see, these spaces here is where the plaster has simply fallen away. But we can see some things happening. Here is a woman being assaulted, and she's got a red dress on. And there are 2 soldiers assaulting her with probably nefarious means in mind. Here's a dead body lying in the street. Here is another person being assaulted by what looks like it's supposed to be a soldier grabbing the neck of this victim. And then the city itself is falling apart. the bricks and stones from this building have fallen down into the street. The columns in the windows have fallen. The city itself is falling apart. And there are annotations in Italian, again, beneath this portion of the fresco, where Lorenzetti writes, "Where there is tyranny, there are great fears, wars, robberies, treacheries, and frauds, because each seeks only his own good, selfishness, the opposite of concordia and commonwealth. In this city, justice is subjected to tyranny." These two fresco cycles then are opposite each other. So you're sitting in a room about this size, where that whole wall is bad government, this whole wall is good government, and that's the allegory, and that's a nice set of windows that look out on the piazza. The message is very clear. Lorenzetti has gone to great pains to avoid ambiguity. There's nothing ambiguous about this at all. You've got Latin annotations, titles of all these people: Sapientia, Furor, Divisio, Guerra. You have Italian explanations beneath all of these frescoes in boxes that are about this far off the ground. So they're right about head height. Easy to read for the percentage of the population that was literate in Italian. And then you have all these very clear pictorial representations of justice, of tyranny, of concordia, of wisdom, etc. But what might have struck a chord most forcefully with these 14th century Sienese are the antithetical images of the city. In the allegory, or the fruits of good government, we have people literally building a city. And it's a very cool representation of how you built a building in the Middle Ages. If you go to Italy today, you'll notice in a lot of the very old buildings, there are a series of square holes at regular intervals going up the sides of the building. It's because the way they did the scaffolding was quite ingenious. You would insert lumber into these holes and then put your scaffolding on top of it. You'd build up several feet, make a new set of holes, put in more scaffolding, climb up on that, and keep going up and up and up. So you could build something very tall without a huge scaffolding around it, just a scaff around the portion you're building. And then this detail from the consequences of bad government, he's really done a great deal of work to show the degradation of the city. The framing behind this wall, the bricks that have fallen from this balcony, the pillars on the balcony itself are crumbling in various stages of disrepair. These windows here are missing their center columns, and there's damage on either side. And so this good and bad, fruits and consequences, would have been particularly poignant for a group of urban city dwellers, like the people who would serve in this Council of Nine for their 2-month terms. Okay, so what have we learned? Why don't you take a few minutes, the person sitting next to you, and do some comparison of your notes. I went to a conference down at the AHA in New Orleans, the American Historical Association conference, in early January, and I went to a panel. Most of the panels were, I don't want to use the term boring, but I don't not want to use the term boring. But I went to one by a neuroscientist, and she had done functional MRI studies over a period of time of students' brains, and found that it's very easy to form new dendrites. That's connections between neurons in your brain, which hold new information. But that those connections die very easily. Those new dendrites disappear very easily if the material isn't reinforced. And so what you're going to do now with the person next to you is to do some dendrite reinforcing by going back over your notes comparing what you thought was salient with the person sitting next to you. So, work on those dendrites. John, yes?
Alright.
It was like a...
Yeah, I gotta get it very urbanized.
Oh, it's a cities were had kind of like collapsed everywhere else except for maintain their cities.
No, I get you.
I wrote cities were a big feature of the Roman Empire, those who died, the collapse of the majority, except in Italy, so I guess.
Where the Roman Empire
Yeah, they were politically isolated.
Yes, they have a big
That's my dinner. German, I would say.
a diet of pasta.
The diet was like hard lamb. That was all the dominant thing. I want to know why people hate. Like, why would some people be why he like came down there like, that makes sense, everyone was like, what the heck? They had to lead a battle. They won. That's pretty much all I figured. His son,
It's about 12 copies. Just around 12.
I remember saying that. Yeah, because then he got Siena and said it wasn't and then they had the piece, which was okay, I was like, this is sort of Sweden too far. Like constant of the city and something is where they like I don't know, I wrote that down. Or, you know, like right races and stuff. I think. I just conference is just like everything's good. You're back to the first.
In the German Empire, the first still play a role in the time in politics.
Vienna benefited Alright, this part kind of sweet.
I know.
There were a lot of and that's like the House of Representatives, which he said they rotate out a lot. Are they every 2 months? I thought not the Council of 9. I thought the Council of 9 rotated out. Yeah, you're right.
Council of 9.
I know that's a lot of people to rotate out of it, but I don't know when they. I just figured they rotate out. I don't know when. the mayor of Swords is here, chief executive officer for Podesta. Is that the mayor or is that?
How's that?
It's like the first time he's
All right. Well, I might have to ask because he was just like, oh, what's he? I know. And then was president. And then
Also, wait.
Podesta's the
Yeah.
Podesta's the corner.
I have Podesta always a corner of another city in interruption, like the chief magistrate. Then the council of nine. President and nine parts. Okay, that was the thing I missed.
Where was that? Like the 9th previous, like Podesta, mayor.
I saw the other class and I went to see his little class. It's like,
No, I think.
I was like, what's fine? Yeah.
It's just it's a lot of.
City merchants make up the council of nine. There was the midling.
Okay, are there any questions?
2 months, like, kills the palate.
Okay, glad I was very clear. Okay, so on Wednesday, our first discussion day, there he is, Randolph Starn. This is an article written in 1987, Republican Regime of the Room of Peace in Siena, 1338, 1340. There's a lot of images in it. It's a little on the long side. It's about 27, 28 pages long, with a lot of images. And given what we've done in the lecture today, it should be fairly intelligible. Your job is to read it before Wednesday, to take notes on it, either handwritten notes or computer notes. Either one is fine. Bring those with you on Wednesday, because on Wednesday you'll get into your groups, your teams. First half of the class, you'll discuss the article. What are his theses? How does he prove it? Do you think he does a good job, bad job, that type of stuff. And the second half of the day, we'll talk about it as a general class as best can be done with 76 people. Now, I used to do faces today, so if you've just added to class, come up and talk to me, and we'll get you assigned into a team, and so you can have a nice place to be on Wednesday. Other than that, I'm done. Read Randolph Starn.